All right, I'll call to order the Medical Advisory Ad Hoc Committee at 5:32. Okay, because this is usually a pretty large crowd, but let's just go around and do our roll call individually again, just name so the public knows who's here.
All right, I'm Randy Gutenberg, Superintendent Waunakee Schools.
Bill Ram, Dean Medical.
Sarah Anderson-Kim, I'm the school nurse.
Lauren Dahlman, nurse practitioner.
Sarah Yates, nurse practitioner. Valerie Clevenger, I'm a district physical therapist.
Brian Grabarski, Director of Human Resources. Kurt Ely, Director of Student Services.
Jack Heineman, board member.
Brian Hafer, board member. We want to make sure that we, in each meeting, have a medical professional statement. So the thoughts and opinions of the medical professionals on this ad hoc committee are based on their own knowledge and expertise and do not represent the viewpoints and practices of their employer. They are volunteering their time and expertise, and we thank them for being a part of this committee. If you had a chance to look at the minutes from our last meeting, if there's not any questions, if I can get a motion to approve them.
Motion to approve.
Can I get a second? Okay. So all approve to the acceptance of the minutes from last meeting?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, any opposed? All right. And the agenda is in front of you on the in the file, as well as was posted online as well, and we'll need to get a motion to approve the agenda.
Motion to approve.
Okay, and a second?
Second.
All approve, say aye. All opposed? All right. So I'm going to turn it over to Randy to start us off on the start of the year.
All right, awesome. Before we do so, I just want to kind of overview what's in front of you in your packet. You'll see a copy of the agenda, and then you'll see 3 different paper clipped packets that will coincide with some different topics we're talking about tonight. One of them being some of the metrics and data from Public Health Madison-Dane County. The second packet is looking at some different opening and closing metrics or processes that come from the CDC and then a couple other districts across the state of Wisconsin. And then the last packet is ones with regards to our approach to situations and COVID-related issues, and Kurt Ely will walk through kind of what their process is for how we're dealing with that and looking for feedback. But to start with, I just want to give an update on how the first week of school is going. Part of when we set this meeting was to kind of coincide it with about a week after school began last week on the 8th. We have our K through 2 students in an AM PM hybrid. Our class sizes, I would say, range from about 7 to 12, 13 at the upper end. I think it's going very well. I think as far as some of the protocols and processes we put in place, kids generally being able to work with the masking requirements. Credit our staff for all the work that they've put in and the pieces that they've been able to work through from reports that I've just observed, and then from our administrative team and from some of the pieces of feedback from parents. I think that process has gone fairly well. Now, there are some things that we are continuing to track. I know Kurt and our nursing staff have been working with really tracking any families or students that have had symptoms, and then also families that have had confirmed or close contact with someone with COVID. We have been documenting that, and Kurt can talk about that a little bit later in the agenda, but that's definitely been a piece that we've worked through. As we reported out to our parents this week, or last week I guess it was, we did have one COVID incident within our district. That was within the central office here, and we've been able to work through that situation effectively with our processes. When we take a look at kind of starting school, I think there's been 2 parts that we've been trying to put our focus to. Certainly the physical health of our kids, but also the mental health of our kids, and looking then the academics, both in person and virtually. When we look at the mental health aspects, I think that's been a piece of, we have a social emotional learning committee that has done a lot of work over the last spring and then the summer to really put together a program across the district to help support children as we're in, well, at all times, but particularly as we're in the environment we're in right now. The board has also been very supportive of, as we're able to, per the public health orders, try and involve kids in as many activities in person as we're able to and do it safely. We started with things this summer like our strength and conditioning class, which for the most part was meeting on our football field, socially distanced on the hash marks or on the 5-yard line markers, small groups coming together, getting kids active. That's been very successful throughout the summer. We're continuing that this fall. They've also supported our contact time with some of our WIAA athletics from grade 7th grade through 12th grade. Some of that has started this week. So that's again within the boundaries of what's allowed per public health, social distancing, and all of the different aspects regarding our protocols that we have as a district. We've also supported tennis, golf, and cross country as sports to continue to move forward, and I think that's gone extremely well too. So those pieces I think are just good for kids to get them active, get them moving. We've been able to do them safely up until this point, and being able to put pieces in place that have been able to keep them in progress. Next week we are going to be doing a social emotional screener with all of our kids and families to just check in to see how kids are doing from a mental health perspective. And then as we get that data back, we'll be able to follow up and assist with any kids or families that are struggling. So that'll be a piece that's still forthcoming. This week we also brought in some of our special education students, and that's been happening K through 12 with regards to some of our kids that really have the most astute needs that we can best address in person, and bringing them in either one-on-one or in small groups. And again, I've seen from the reports that I've heard, that's gone fairly well as that too. So start of the school year, I think overall is off to a good start. We have staff around the table here, Val, Kurt, Sarah, Brian, and others. If you have anything to add, I welcome you to share your perspective on how school has started, but on an overall kind of high-level piece, I think it's off to a relatively good start. Kurt, anything to add from your perspective?
No, I think you covered the social emotional piece. I had Chris Mann, Assistant Director of Student Services, who's really been leading the efforts in regards to social emotional as well as mental health, and Randy did a good job covering what the buildings are doing, and just again that screener. There'll be 2 screeners, one that students will get and one that families will get, and then we will use the responses to determine which students, which families we want our student services staff, our psychologists, social workers, counselors to reach out to just see if there's some additional assistance that we would be able to provide, or hook the parents' families up with resources outside of our district, but community or county-based resources. So we'll see how that goes, and we'll respond. And that's something that we're going to do on an ongoing basis. It's not a one-and-done event. It's going to be periodically we will be sending that out just to see how things are going.
Al, anything to add from your perspective?
No, I mean, special ed's come back in, so we've had kids in the building from what the limited that I've heard, but I also tried to lock myself down just due to my high exposure. But from what I've heard, that seems to be so far so good.
Great. Sarah, you've been very involved and very busy the last few weeks. How about from your perspective?
Yeah, I think overall staff is doing a really great job of following the protocols that we've put in place. You know, it's as with any new system, it's not going to work 100% perfectly 100% of the time. So there have been some hiccups in the first several days that we've addressed with either, you know, additional training or observations or that type of thing, just to help. I mean, we know that the processes are there, and especially with things like temperature checks and when we're asking non-health staff to do health-related tasks, there's a learning curve for that, and so I'm really trying to be sure that that is that we are communicating with our non-health staff about things that we can do to improve that process. I think that kids are doing a good job of wearing their masks. And feedback that I've gotten from younger grade teachers is that it's tricky sometimes to maintain that social distancing, but we know that public health guidelines say to maintain that distance to the greatest extent possible for those children who are able to wear masks. And so I would say, that's going well, and I encourage staff to, encourage that distance, but also not to feel so stressed out if at certain times during the day it's not possible to maintain that 6 feet. One area that we have looked at and talked about is sort of the 6-foot social distancing with patients or with students who are not able to tolerate facial coverings. We have several students who are not wearing cloth face coverings, but they've got the bucket hat that has a shield there. It's not sealed at the bottom. But the students that we have right now in the building who aren't able to tolerate facial coverings have the bucket hat, and their staff that's working with them are wearing PPE, including eye protection, a surgical mask, a gown if necessary for whatever task they're doing, or the badge or shield. The one area that I would like feedback from the members of the committee is, social distancing recommendations for these students who aren't able to tolerate facial coverings and may not also be able to maintain that 6-foot distancing if they're in a classroom setting. That's been a tricky, and we've been working on it, but I think it's important to get that feedback from the members of the committee as to, ideas or, how we can work with that. And then contact tracing has been a big portion of time that we've spent the last several days, and I think Kurt's going to talk about that.
Yeah, you want me to share a little bit about that, Randy, now, or?
Is that going to come at your other item, or is that?
No.
Go ahead.
We could do it kind of as a start of school.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So we have, to date, we have 19 staff and or students who have either tested positive for COVID or have had close contacts with someone who's tested positive for COVID. So these people are obviously not in our schools. They are home, and we are continuing to monitor, because in some cases within a family we've had re-exposures, so the time keeps moving out. So when we're doing our contact tracing, in this respect, it's not one and done. It's one and you follow up to see if there's a new development or something like that. So it's, you're constantly in contact with these families. It's primarily been Sarah. I've had a couple that I've been working through, but it's primarily been Sarah who's been working through these as we continue to evaluate and assess, and Brian has helped with the staff component as well. So that's kind of an ongoing process with families and staff. We have had some people who've cleared. They've met their either 14 or 10 day, depending which one it is. They've been cleared and they're back already to either work and or coming to school if it's a student. So We've had a few that have cleared, but at this point, we have 19 that we've had to really monitor and watch because of either a direct positive or a close contact with someone who has positive. Today, Sarah, and I'm going to turn it over to her at this point, Sarah, because we also have some students who are showing symptoms of, and Sarah's going to kind of talk about the process that we're using with that, and then the number of people that we're monitoring with symptoms but haven't had a test or haven't had a close contact. So Sarah,
I got one question first.
Yeah.
Kurt, how many of the 19 do we know have been tested? Or are they just going through the 10 to 14 days?
Oh, well, I guess I would
Or-
have to.
I'm trying to figure out what we can know.
Yeah, well,
And
even
should
if you're a close contact and you test negative, you still have to stay out for 14 days. So we have some of that.
Okay.
I could go through my charts here and give you an exact number. It's probably about half to a third that have actually been tested and either have a positive or negative. Not everybody has been tested who's had a close contact, but some have gone and got tested.
What is the total staff population?
Just a bit under 600.
So Sarah, you want to talk about kind of some of the things that you picked up and are doing this week?
Yeah, so as you know, if a student, I'll talk specifically about students. If a student has had direct contact with someone who's tested positive for COVID-19, they need to be quarantining for 2 weeks from the date of last exposure. And if a student tests positive, they need to be out for the 10 days after onset of symptoms, and they need to be 24 hours fever-free without fever-reducing medication, and their symptoms need to be better. And then there's another category of students who are the students who have one of the 12 COVID-19 symptoms on the list. And I don't know if those are in the packet.
Yeah, they are.
They're in the,
What Sarah is referring to is this chart.
It's in your last packet on the last.
Yeah. So on this COVID-19, when a student or faculty can return to class, you have the symptoms here: cough, shortness of breath or difficulty breathing, new loss of taste or sense of smell, congestion, runny nose, fever, chills, nausea or vomiting, diarrhea, headache, fatigue, muscle or body aches, or sore throat. Cough, shortness of breath or difficulty breathing, and new loss of taste or smell are those symptoms. If a student is called in sick with any of those symptoms, that is considered consistent with possible COVID-19. And we need to do follow-up with those families to see the other history. And I've been working closely with the health office assistants. They've been helping us collect some of this data. Parents are reaching out to us proactively to let us know some of this data. But for those students, cough is probably the biggest one that we've been, you have to reach out and see if that student has had any close contacts, in which case they need to be out for 2 weeks. When their symptoms started, have they seen a provider and found an alternative diagnosis other than COVID for that cough? Or have they had a COVID test? And so we've been thorough with that, and we're following the guideline that if that student has a cough but is not tested, they're excluded from the in-person learning environment for 10 days. If they see a provider and get the alternative diagnosis, they can come back to school with the provider note, provided that they've been fever-free for 24 hours and their symptoms have improved. And if they have a negative COVID test and no close contacts, they can come back to school as long as they've been fever-free and the cough has improved. So as you can see, just with one student that has a cough, there's a lot of information gathering that has to happen. And I would say that the health office assistants, Court and I, probably spend between a half an hour to an hour for each case of a student that calls in with a symptom like this.
So, improved or resolved?
Improved.
Symptoms?
Yeah.
So you can still be over the COVID virus, but still have symptoms lingering on?
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Yep.
Well, I meant in terms of the cough and...
Yeah, so if you have the common cold and you have a cough
Mhm.
and you go and you get tested for COVID and it's negative and you know of no close contacts, as long as your fever has been gone for 24 hours and your cough has improved, and we would add for kids that your cough is improved and you're able to kind of, maintain it at school. I mean, if you had a horrendous cough and it's still really, really bad and you're coughing a ton in your mask and you need to change it, you probably still shouldn't be at school. But if you've got a cough and it's improved and your COVID test is negative and there are no close contacts, then you can be back, even if you're coughing.
We've talked about the term control for the cough, kind of,
Yeah.
I think what you're getting at a little bit, but to the point, you can have cough after a viral infection, that's not COVID for months in the winter, and that's not uncommon, so, but at that point, it should be controlled, not productive, you're not having a fever,
Right.
those types of things. If it's not controlled, you bring the question of, now other kids are gonna get that same cough, and now you've got to contact trace and deal with all of those kids as well, so that could get pretty hairy pretty quick.
And we've tried to share, so in these cases where we've had kids that have symptoms, we talked about who needs to know the information. So in these cases where we've made a decision that a student needs to be out of the in-person learning environment for an extended period of time due to, being symptomatic, I am involved in, I'm part of it. The classroom teacher is notified that, if they have a child coughing in their classroom, they know that we've done the follow-up, and that when the student is able to come back, if they're still coughing, they've been included in this process, so they know. The attendance secretaries are notified so that they're able to let us know if, maybe there was a miscommunication and the student comes back to school too soon. And the building administrators are also involved. So we've tried to keep people who need to know in the know without excessively sharing information. So for, cough is the big one. And then the other symptoms on the list, according to the guidelines, you have to have 2 or more of the symptoms in order to kind of fit into that suspected COVID where we would do a follow-up. So if a parent reaches out and they say, my child has a stuffy nose this morning, my advice to them is please monitor it for other symptoms. Definitely let us know if they develop a cough or if they develop any of the other symptoms on the list. And I'm sending them a copy of our guidance returning to school after COVID-19, so that they're able to then go through that and know what to do if their child develops more symptoms. If someone does have 2 of the other symptoms on the list, the process is the same. It's identifying contacts, identifying when the symptoms started, excluding for 10 days if they've got those 2 symptoms, unless they've seen somebody to say that it's something different or had something negative. And in all of the conversations with parents, we're making sure that we're sharing the information that this is sort of, we know that there's a high rate of community spread. And so when we're giving you the return date for your child, that's the earliest return date. and that you need to contact us if your situation changes between now and then. For example, if someone in your house tests positive for COVID, if your child who was previously negative develops more symptoms, is tested again and tests positive. You know, there are a lot of scenarios, and the scenario could change from when we make phone contact to when that student is able to enter school. So there's a lot of communication and information sharing that needs to happen with parents so that we're able to allow children to come to school when they're able, but to reduce the chance of transmission of COVID when we know that a child falls into these categories.
I do want to just put a plug out there thanking all of the parents who have reached out to us because if they wouldn't have, we wouldn't have known that, you know, what's happening out in the community. Public health will not contact us for the close contacts. So if we have a child who's a close contact, we will not know that through public health. We will only know that if the parent reaches out to us to let them know that their child is a close contact. So we really appreciate the parents who have reached out to us because that just allows us to stay on top of this the best that we can, because that's the only way we're going to find out for the close contacts. And that is the majority of what we have right now, our close contacts.
The other piece of it too that I'm trying to encourage families when I talk to them is that we know that this is in our community, and so if you are a close contact, for example, because your child had contact at a play date where there were multiple children at the play date and therefore all of the children would be considered close contacts, that within your circle of neighbors or families or however, if someone learns that they're COVID positive and that there may be multiple close contacts involved, that you share that information with the children that your kids have played with, the families of the children that your kids have played with, because that is the only way then for parents to let us know, yes, my child was a close contact, if that family hasn't been notified by public health, which may take days instead of, you know, if you text your friend and say, my husband tested positive, I know your kids were playing at my house on Saturday, we can kind of put the kibosh on things a little bit sooner. So really encouraging sort of an open conversation with the groups of people in your bubble that you have made a decision to include in activities, just so that there can always be open conversations about that, so that people can reach out to us and let us know. Right now, in the first 5 days of school, we have followed up with 15 families that have had students call in with a symptom that's on the list that requires some kind of conversation and education to the families about if, when, how the children can come back to school.
We have about 600 kids in right now. When you look at our K through 2 students, about 2/3 of them have chosen to come in person, and about 1/3 of them have chosen the virtual. So that's roughly 600 kids that are in across the district. Plus, then we added some of our special ed this week.
Yeah, the number of special ed students that we've added in grades 3 through 12 is right around 80. That would be in the 3 through 12. Now we have others who are in younger grades, but they're part of the 600 range.
About 700. Now, Sarah, you had a question about PPE. I don't want to lose that before we go on into other things. So
Mhm.
why don't you pose your question to the group, and then we can see if we can get you some feedback on that.
Yeah, so my question is, we have a balance of working with students. We're committed to working with students who are unable to tolerate face coverings in our school environment. And I guess the first question is, how do you feel about the bucket hat as a substitute for cloth face covering? And then the second question is, in a learning environment, if a student has a bucket hat on, is it, how much leeway is there for allowing that child not to maintain the 6-foot distancing from students in the classroom who are not wearing PPE?
So we have a relatively small number of kids that are wearing the bucket hat, is that right?
We do.
Yeah, it's small.
Yeah. So
And it would
but
be-
your question is for those kids that are, and many of them would be like working with Val and with others in some of the special ed
All
environments.
special ed?
Yeah, I feel like we've done what we need
It
to
is.
do to address the PPE needs of the staff working with students. But I'm wondering if, I want to be sure that we're taking the precautions necessary to protect the students in the classroom that have contact with the students who are not able to tolerate face coverings.
To me, I think that we're always going to be doing the best we can. I mean, that's the end of this, right? I mean, the staff, I guess I'm reviewing this for the staff. We're wearing masks and we have some sort of eye coverage.
Covering, yeah.
And that's, I know it's difficult to hear, but there's, as far as to me, that's maybe the best you can do in this setting. We're not wearing they don't have the type with the mesh below, right? The bucket.
They do. So,
Some do.
Yeah, staff is definitely wearing the proper PPE.
And the kids, they won't tolerate some of them can't tolerate the other.
Yeah. But I guess we haven't really tried a badge or shield.
We haven't.
I know there are gonna be students who wouldn't tolerate.
Right, I know that there's
Yeah.
a percentage.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's a spectrum, right? So if you talk about a shield or a bucket hat versus, a barrier mask or a face covering, it's not as good. If you talk about how much can you so it's just, there's the best case scenario, everybody wearing face covering, staying 6 feet apart, and there's nobody doing anything. And, you're going to be not being able to wear the mask, the face covering, moves you further up the risk profile. And the more time, it's about duration and intensity of exposure. So the more time that child spends in close proximity to another child, the more that risk goes up, provided if that child were positive.
Right.
So I don't know if there's ever an absolute, there. I just think the more that they are within 6 feet, the more that they are, the more people who are not wearing the face covering, the more risk you have. I don't know that there's be an arbitrary line. I think the answer would be, minimize it as much as possible, and if there's a way to sort of, provide extra encouragement to that child,
Yeah.
that'd be ideal. But I
And
don't know
staff
what
is
you can do.
definitely doing
Yeah.
that. Staff is
Yeah.
really, so if for children who are moving into the space of other children, the paraprofessionals working with them are definitely, they're on it. They're right there, kind of redirecting in the best way possible. And so I do think that there is that redirection that's happening. And then the other thing that came up was just how much do we sanitize then after that, those interactions, and is it practical to sanitize after every contact? And so, I just advise if it's, use the wipe if it's a shared object that was touched, and that kind of thing.
I think it's a do the best you can.
Yeah, I believe we're basically dealing with population mechanics, right? And it is probably an exponential exposure if the staff and as many people as possible have the mask and eye coverings on. Just if somebody's positive and they're exposed, they'll do better than if they aren't. I mean, as far as, it's just, you can never say it's going to be 1 or 0, right? I mean, it's always, to everybody's point, it's like, it's this continuum, probably an exponentially related one. If you got your stuff on, you're probably less at risk, right?
And I think we are doing a good job of trying to manage it within the constraints that we have.
And I think that's what we are, right? It's the best we can be.
Does that help, Sarah? Before we move on, any questions about start of the school year for me or for any other members of our team around the table?
Do you know a number where you mentioned like we've done 15 families or contact tracing? Do you have an idea of how many you can do and handle?
Yeah,
That's
that's exactly my question. I was like, oh my God.
I work from 4 a.m. to 10 p.m.
Which is fine with us.
Yeah, so I think that it'll get easier as the health office assistants continue to be more comfortable with the questions. We've been developing a script for them to call, and what I'd like to do is maybe even have, if a family calls with a symptom and is reported to the attendance line, that automatically that family gets a message that says, thank you for reporting that your child is ill today. Please see the attached returning to school after COVID-19 guidelines. And that doesn't mean that we're saying that the child has COVID, right? But then it's an automatic triggering to push out the resources so that a family has for sure, even though it should be on the website, has in their hands the document for making decisions about whether their child can come back to school. And then in that email, ask the important questions. Do you know of any close contacts? What are your child's symptoms? When did your symptoms start? So that on the front end, we've got some data to work with, and then we can call to confirm that data. Instead of, parents are not always available to answer the phone, and so then I could call at 8 o'clock in the morning and have to go do a med training at the intermediate school, and then you play phone tag. So I think that we do need to be very systematic in how we collect this data, and we can work with, Anne or whoever to help just be sure that we want to be sure that we're collecting data that we need without having families feel like we're probing for that information. This is important information that we need to know, and that hopefully we can work together as a team to help decide when it's safe for their child to return to school.
But to your point though, I think you said it takes you like
at least a half an hour
to an hour. I'm not sure that you can get it below a half hour because of just time dialed to talk, to touch base with several other people.
Yeah.
So what's your capacity?
Yeah. So
16 a day.
Yeah. 16 a day without, if all I was doing was contact tracing.
Right.
And if I was full-time.
Yeah, I mean, to get real, I spent pretty much Monday till about 1 or 1:30 doing this. And again, I'm not really the one making all the contacts, that's Sarah. But we talk through every situation, and as she learns more information, we talk about the new information. I pretty much spent my day on Monday doing that. As we bring in, and again, I'm not trying to say don't bring in more grades. I'm not saying that at all. If we bring in more grades, it's great, but bringing in more grades is going to have an impact on contact tracing. It may mean that we're going to ask for more staff to help with contact tracing, because I don't know that we're going to be able to do it with the staff that we currently have. So I just want you to know, people to know that for us to continue to do the job that we're doing, we may need more people to do it.
Yeah, and all I'm saying is it's one FTE, whether it's you, it's one FTE that is dedicated to doing this, because if you're not dedicated to it, you're running off to different appointments and what did I talk to them about? And that half hour now turns into an hour because you got to, rethink what you've done.
And I said that to Kurt, that, it really, because you're getting information from building principals, you're getting information from families, you're checking an Infinite Campus to see if there are siblings involved. The process is complex, and you're waiting for people to return phone calls. It is a job best suited for someone who's sitting in a quiet office with no interruptions, honestly.
Is there any automated software?
We do virtual visits. I'm sure you guys do virtual visits to get information.
Right, are you thinking about something else?
Well, what I'm thinking is, how do we try to automate some of this stuff?
You
Yeah.
can email, you can definitely send an email and try to collect as much as you
Right, I
can.
think what you're trying to do up front is trying to have families give you the information you know you're going to need already, so you don't have to ask for it, during that time, to try to make it as efficient as possible. But to your other point, some of that, once you get it, you have to go back, and you're going to have to do things in the back end that, to verify or.
Yeah, I mean, if there was a system where if a parent was calling to report their child sick, if they were filling out something similar to the daily symptom check, where they were saying that they had these symptoms, and then if they had one of the 3 big ones, or if they had 2 or more of the smaller ones, if that would somehow trigger an instant message to them saying, these are the guidelines for these symptoms, then don't bring your child to school today, and call your school nurse, and fill out this questionnaire about your contacts so that we have that information, that would be great.
Do you think you could create that?
We should.
Actually, we should. That's what you should do, because that's.
Well, the reality of it is we probably could create pieces of that, because Brian actually did create that, a piece of it with our staff, because we all do our symptom checks online. And then it tells us if we should come to work or not. So that part we could create. The additional piece, I don't know, has been created, where the auto messaging, to get the next layer of information comes. I don't think that's there, but could that be created within the same system that we have? It probably can. The problem is, and I'm going to kind of turn it over to Brian, I know it took him a lot of time to create what we are using for staff.
Yeah, I mean, it was a multi-week process with an implementation engineer on the backside. In theory, obviously, us doing it with him, it's a heavily intensive program, and so it takes. Could it be created by someone that's not an implementation engineer? Yes. Will it work properly?
We don't know.
That I'm less confident with that. So yes, I mean there's certainly it's certainly possible to create systems like this within a tool we already have called Qualtrics, and so and we could to a certain degree pattern it after what we have with the adults, our staff, who it does certain responses trigger auto messages to supervisors and to myself. And then it becomes, that it's a different deal with adults, certainly.
But Sarah, for those who kind of identify that their child's not feeling well, they're calling in, and then they would kick to them. Because what we do is we do something for all of our staff, and we talked about it with like all of our kids, but if you trying to then determine and discern when you've got kids coming into the building of who did it or who didn't, is part of our challenge. The staff were able to manage it, but.
Yeah, I think the problem solving for that would be you have staff at the door with an iPad, and that information gets downloaded about who had a sheet filled out for that day. And if the student instead of our paper form, I think if we did something like this, it would be to to do it for all students, because sometimes we get a paper form that has cough checked on it.
Sure.
And then we still have to follow up with the parent, and the student is already there, and the student has to wait in the isolation room until we get in contact with the parent to learn the more details.
Right.
So if we were to implement something like this, I think you would collect the symptom data, not just about kids who are calling out sick, but about everyone, and then parents would immediately have that information necessary to make a decision about whether to send their child to school, and hopefully they would get an email, the building level principal would get an email, I would get an email, and then everybody on the team, parents included, could work together to decide. But yeah, it's something.
But what you want to do is have that information before they get to the school. So if it would be an online program where all I got to do is open up my computer and my child has a cough or a symptom, then you put it there, and then that data triggers whatever you're doing internal to the building.
Yeah.
You know, that way you're capturing it before they even get here. Because right now what you're doing is capturing it when they get here, and then what do you do? Is everybody actually filling out those, you know, how many, what's the percentage of those check?
Yeah, so the first day we had some missing forms and we sent out a reminder. We had two issues. There were some missing forms and then there were forms that were sent in, but the temperature hadn't been taken and recorded in the morning. And so we had staff take those temperatures. But we had the principals send out reminders, and after that it's improved a lot.
It's really good. It's good.
So
Parents are doing a great job with that part.
A few points I just would like to bring up in the conversation, and that is, if we're working at a more automated system, I think first we have to remember that we've got to have a backup system for those without internet.
Yeah.
Because that is a reality for some of our families, and we can't let those families slip through the cracks for whatever reason they don't have a platform to use. And the other part of that is I think we need to make sure that we're really watching the complexity of both the language that gets put out and what we're asking of parents, because if they click a bunch of boxes and it puts too much information to them as to what they're supposed to do next, and 3 steps can get really complex for a lot of families, and especially if you're already worried about the health of your child and you're trying to understand a language that may not be, we all speak in jargon, and I straddle the world of education and medical, and so the number of acronyms that I know is huge, and that doesn't include the ones I make up myself. And so, when we're looking at all the jargon that we use, whether it's acronyms or just other words, we just need to be really mindful of parents so that we're keeping it school friendly for them as well.
Good
But
point.
this would just be one of those little like forms online, and you fill it out, and then you get the paper system already in place, so if you don't have the internet, you can still fill out the white paper. But I think the more automated you can get, now, that 16 per FTE per day may go up to 30, right?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it seems like it'd be interesting to sort of prototype it. If I had this set of information that I think I could get and then run through one of them, almost as like a dummy trial, to see what you really could get it down to. Because ultimately you're going to know what your capacity is going to be. Because, when you think about November, December, the number is going to go up.
Yeah.
And so you kind of want to know what is the capacity going to be, how many people am I going to need. So it seems like before you go building something, you probably want to know what the prototype is and figure out how much faster can it make you.
Yeah, you wouldn't do it all schools at once, you do that one to find out. Because there might be unintended consequences of it.
There might be.
Well, I think about how do you get, when you get that information, who gets it, and if you're all of a sudden getting all this extra data, how, who's processing it, and all of those things too.
it's an important conversation to have, and I think that there will be, even if we were to have a more automated system, I think that there would need to be someone managing the data coming
I
in.
think we talked about that the last time, like the COVID center.
Yeah.
In the school, I think you need one.
Right,
Because it doesn't actually work otherwise. You have to have somebody who can, it's way more efficient to do it just serially.
yeah,
Because if that phone call doesn't come in, that's ours, and we have the nurse that does that,
yeah,
follows it. That nurse does, she doesn't get that contact, she knows the next one she's gonna work at, that one will call back, you know, it's just this.
yeah.
It's the same reason that health systems are using incident command structures.
Yep.
You know, because otherwise it just doesn't get done, or it certainly doesn't get done efficiently.
Right.
I think the piece we have to think about as part of the paper ticket was it's kind of your ticket into the building.
Mm-hmm.
When you do it electronically, there is a sense of, ideally, it would be great if our school was this big. We can all have someone on an iPad looking at and saying, I find Bill, I find Matt, I find Sarah. But when you got kids coming in the morning and there's a number of them, can you check every one in a timely manner? And I think that's part of why we didn't do the electronic piece at the schools. We did it with staff. If you do it at the schools, you're going to be kind of doing an honor system that people are filling it out, and you're going to be catching people afterwards. So it's kind of, which do you prefer? I mean, and there's pros and cons to both. We chose the paper because it was kind of, at least at the time, it was kind of the ticket in. And we hoped that parents and kids would get a student to that, so that we limited the number of people we had to pull off and do other temperature checks.
And as a,
What I would say to that is I live with the staff system every day. That's how I start every single day, is with an opening of my email to monitor who's approved and not approved. You will absolutely never be able to get away from the interactive portion of that fact finding, because how one person interprets symptoms in comparison to their own health is very different than another person. And Kurt and I have modified the language on our staff instrument a handful of times already to try to get to language that everyone can become commonly aware of and agree to. And I've not yet found that language. Secondly, the one thing I can speak to definitively is that there is nothing in the system that we have that would allow an easy search for an individual for an entry point. And so the only way around that would be, if they had a smart device, they can show you their approval or disapproval. But again, we're talk about little ones right now, they're not going to have that.
Yeah.
And they're not going to have their parents all with them uniformly to provide that. And even within an iPad or a PC or whatever, you have to do a search for an individual. And so that's not that idea of a ticket for entry is not capable within the system that we have.
I was just thinking that if you do the paper, if you have no symptoms, you give the paper. If they get a symptom, then you have to go to the email, or we would like you to go to email. I mean, is sort of we've gone from everybody gets tested in our system to like now you're picking out the positives. You know what I mean? As far as doing the check. So ours has become like, and I know there are no perfect systems. Like, hey, you have your ticket entry, that's that paper one that everybody just gives. If, however, you're going to do the call in and say you got a sick kid that is, I'm just using an example. We send an email to a supervisor. You're not coming in. You're emailing me to tell me you're not coming in, and I'm going to tell you to do ours is a virtual visit or a test. I mean, that's how that works. So 98% of them are going right through the path. The 2%, then you're getting at least some of the data. Right? I mean, some of the data is, in our system, it's to decide on a test. Yours might be to decide whether you're coming in.
Yeah.
And not everybody's going to be able to give it either. Right? So we know that of that percent, that 90% may be able to do it online and 10% cannot, and that's fine. I mean, so.
But you're also talking about not necessarily, we're talking about the ticket in the door. The ticket in the door could remain, and still you could get your type of information for the 90% of people or whatever percent can do the virtual.
If you check one of these, please email us.
I thought this whole discussion started with somebody called in to say, what do I do?
Yeah,
Right?
so,
So if I'm calling in, theoretically, I could be close to my computer to enter that data. And I was thinking that, okay, I'm sick, I've got the symptoms, and as part of that sheet, you're saying, okay, I've been close to these people, these activities. So you're populating the database.
That's what I mean by your
Yeah,
There's
and that-
a use for it, but it's probably not the ticket in the door use necessarily.
Yeah, I think it's the non-ticket, right? I mean, you have the ticket and you have the non-ticket. The non-ticket people, would be nice to generate some of the information before she has to call it.
Right.
You know, that the more information she gets, or whoever gets at the COVID center, then the faster you can get through it.
and I think that's something that can be generated by the attendance secretaries, because they're the ones who get the first call that says, my child has this symptom. And so either the attendance secretary, right now what they're doing is either emailing me instantly or they're sending me their attendance report when they've done it. And the attendance report has the symptom on there, and then I know to call. But and that's what I said, if we could get an email that goes out
Yeah, just email
instantly
both
when
of
they
you.
call in, okay, thank you for reporting that your child has this symptom. Here are our guidelines for returning to school if you have COVID symptoms. Our school nurse will be reaching out to you to discuss your particular situation. In the meantime, can you please answer these
Right, that's
questions?
what I think.
And have
That's
it
it.
come to myself and the health office assistant at the school
Maybe Sarah,
to
we
be
can-
able to efficiently collect
Maybe
that
we can
data.
create something like that the attendance secretary can
I
send
think
out when
that's-
that call comes in, so it's not forwarded to you. And then we can collect that.
I think she'll eventually have to make some decisions, but if she has the information, she's gonna be.
Yeah, this is probably the time to do it when there's smaller groups.
And your time is more valuable making the decisions as opposed to collecting.
Yes.
Exactly, and that's why we're treating
So-
the health office assistants and even a little bit more so the attendance secretaries, so that we're getting, all of this week sent out a sample attendance line script that was recommended by DPI, so that when you call in your kid, if your child's sick, it asks you to tell whether they've been tested for COVID-19 or have any close contacts, or if they have any of the symptoms, so that parents get at least a prompt of what to report if they leave a message on the attendance line, so that saves us a step too.
When it's time to reprint more of those attendance slips, sort of the ticket in the door, could we add a spot to record the temperature? Like a line for that?
It's there, it's on
It's
there.
on the new
It
one.
is actually on there.
There's a few that have been
Oh, I
sent
guess
out via email.
Well,
Don't have, I'll have to look at mine again.
Did you get it because of athletics?
No.
The one that we have here doesn't, because we're not taking our
The pads that
temperature.
are in the back on the pallet,
Yeah, they do.
and the ones that I
On the
handed
pallet.
out.
So the one reason that it was unclear to families is because it says fever greater than or equal to 100.4, and then there's a line there, but some families thought they only needed to write it if it was greater than 100.4. And so we've clarified that regardless of whether your child's temperature is less than 100.4 or greater, please write down the temperature as an indicator to us that their temperature has in fact been taken every day before school.
That sounds like something, you probably have found efficiencies already in the first 7 days of school or 6 days of school.
You're taking it from a pad.
Right.
You guys could probably continue to work on this and stuff and bring it back to us and see how it's going.
Thanks, Sarah. All right, we ready to move on to our next item? Okay. The next item is a big one. This is with regards to the Supreme Court ruling that came out last week with regards to Madison, or Public Health Madison, Dane County. So let me just back up, and when we met the last time as an ad hoc committee, I'm actually going to reference the very first packet in your folder. It's the one that has the reopening Dane County schools and then some of the metrics and data. When we met the last time, what was in front of us was that the board had approved at a meeting in August for us to bring back to school grades K through 4 in a hybrid, AM and PM, and what we call enhanced remote, which basically was kids who were in the 5th through 12th grade would be able to come back if for special education purposes, English language learners who were struggling with online learning, and then some of our students who were in classes that were very hands-on and being able to bring small groups in. That's what the board approved in August. The last time we were together, the metrics for reopening schools had just come out from Public Health Madison-Dane County. And at that point, Public Health said you're only allowed to bring back K through 2. So that's what we've been doing since we opened school. Last week, there was a court case against Public Health saying Public Health did not have the ability or did not have the authority to close schools in that fashion. So that was challenged directly to the Wisconsin Supreme Court, and the Wisconsin Supreme Court put forth a temporary injunction against Public Health Madison-Dane County with regards to their ability to close schools. So what that in effect did was their metric that they were using for grades K2, 3-5, and 6-12 became not enforceable from a public health standpoint, and it really turned into really a recommendation from Public Health. It really removed their ability to enforce that and to mandate it. What that's now placed us in a position is we've brought back K2. Our board has approved, when you go back to our prior motion before Public Health made this decision, to bring back K4. So then the question that we are having and our board is posing is, are we okay to bring back our next iterations of kids? So particularly in this case, given the board's direction, 3rd and 4th grade. And then we've initially during that meeting in August, we also had a time frame of bringing back other grades starting at the quarter, which was in early November. So what I've given you in front of you, and I want to just kind of show you what's in your packet so you kind of have a reference. But the question we're going to be posing is, at what point can we bring other grades back? What metrics do we need to be looking at? And what are some of the things that we need to keep in mind? And can you help us to determine kind of those practices that are going to help us discern what we should do in some of those situations? So the first packet I've given you is the one that shows the metrics that Public Health Madison-Dane County put out. This is the one that shows that we had, if it was based on cases per day over a 2-week period, and you had grade level spans K2, 3, 5, and then 6 through 12. And they had markers in there of 54 cases per day for K2, 39 for 3, 5, and 19 for 6 through 12. Public Health is still going to be putting forth those. They're keeping this as their recommendation. They've reiterated that yesterday in a press release that they still felt that these were valid. And they also have committed to updating their metrics every week. Those come out on Thursdays, so that districts can track that and you can see where those pieces are. Obviously, this is also still an active case going through before the Supreme Court, so their hopes are at a point in the future that this will be returned to their power. But at this point, it's a recommendation. I've also included in that packet the current Dane County data as it was released on September 10th. So you can see that's the one that has the dots on it, the red and white, or the red and green dots. And it's looking at the data that have been viewed as the pertinent data points for us as a county. And this is really pulled together from a compilation of things from the Harvard study and multiple other kind of metrics that Public Health Madison-Dane County pulled from across the country to then develop their own metric. And these are the pieces that are being followed. The last single sheet that is there that's really particular to Dane County, Kurt took some time today with just looking at, from its inception of when they started tracking data on COVID, and just looking at our Waunakee area. So looking at the census data just for Waunakee, and that's the single sheet at the end here. the end of that packet. And this just shows from our 4 census areas that encompass generally our school district, how many cases have we had, what's the population, and just general, but it's not based off of any 7-day or 14-day average. This is basically just an aggregate of everything from the last probably February and March all the way up to current day on the 15th of September. So you can see our population's 28,000 for that area, and we had 252 positives per the data that we were able to pull. This is from the Wisconsin DHS site. So Kurt, do you just want to talk just real briefly of kind of where you pulled that from?
Yeah, if you go to the Department of Health Services website, they have a map of it's the whole state, and then you can toggle over these, they call them census tracts. So it's just, they're not square, they use roads, and so they're not completely defined areas. So I looked at, around Waunakee, and there's basically 4 tracts that encompass our district. There is a 5th tract that would be the extreme north. It's basically, what isn't represented in these numbers is kind of north of Cuba Valley Road, the district that's north of Cuba Valley, because that's a really large area that encompasses Dane and over by DeForest and areas like that, so I didn't pull that one in. The second track on this sheet, just so that you know, the second track, the one that's Census Tract 112, that has a total population of 9,500 people, that does incorporate some of the north end of the city of Middleton, basically Century Avenue to the north, to Onken Road, Balzer Road, Pheasant Branch. It incorporates that area all the way over to the state park, and then along the lake. So it's part of the Waunakee, like it captures Bishop's Bay and everything along that would be in the Waunakee district, and then some of that rural area on Balzer and in that area. But it does include some of the north part of the city of Middleton. So you have to kind of have that as context. So I just pulled all of these tracks, took a look at the map to see what it all entails, and these are the ones that represent the area that covers the Waunakee School District the best. I pulled out the population number, the positive tests, the negative tests, and then just created the percent positive of tests, and that's the information that you have in front of you.
And that's over the course of the entire COVID incident.
It is.
A lot of the data that we often see, and I'll show you in just a moment from some other metrics, is either a 7-day positive ratio or a 2-week data. So this is kind of an aggregate of multiple months. So one of the pieces that we don't have and we don't have access to is kind of that more specific data for just our school district. And that's a question we have out to public health, is are we able to get that? And at this point, it hasn't been provided or hasn't been outlined for us. So this is the first piece. This really speaks to what the metrics are for Dane County. They're not enforceable per the Supreme Court's decision, but they are still recommendations that public health is still standing behind as what they feel are prudent. Under that, they would say, as of today, we had a public health call this morning, they are still open to K through 2 being in person. And they would say that we should remain remote 3 through 12. So that's per public health. The other piece I've added, which is really the next packet that has a chart that looks like this, is not every county in the state has a metric that was developed on a county-wide basis. So we've taken a look at what's happening around our state and just found a few different examples of ways that different districts are utilizing it. So the one with the colored boxes on it is actually a La Crosse School District. And what they're utilizing is they've adopted the Harvard Global Health Institute's matrices and metrics for school reopening. And those were heavily involved and considered by Dane County when they put theirs together. And I just used the lacrosse sheet that I pulled off of their website because I think it's just the most succinct description of this, but there's more information if you desire. There's some other links we can pull up for you. But it basically has a green to red continuum, and it's based off primary metrics of cases per 100,000 over a 7-day period, positive test ratios, close contacts, and as far as how you're able to trace those. Those are your trends. They've broken it out by grade level spans, 4K to 5, 6, 8, 9, 12. Some more traditional elementary, middle school, high school grades. Dane County was a little more granular, and they were K2, 3, 5, and then 6, 12. But as you look at, that is one metric that a group is using, and they're utilizing it then to apply whether they're going to be virtual, a hybrid, and they've determined that based on grade level span. So you can see that in the red area for if you are at that highest risk area, they're recommending all virtual. You move into orange, they have in-person or hybrid for the elementary, but they're looking at things more virtual as you move up, and then it all the way to the green where everybody can be back in person. So that's how La Crosse is looking at it, and they're utilizing the Harvard Global Health Institute's metrics. Elmbrook Schools over by Milwaukee, that's the one in the blue, they are collecting data. They have information either that is specific to their specific school district and community that they're able to then take a look at. They can look at Waukesha County and their community specifically. As I read through their piece, they don't necessarily have a green to red continuum. They have data that they're gathering, and then they are continuing to, they have an advisory board that is reviewing these pieces, and they're making decisions based on just really where those metrics go. But from my review of it, I don't see anything from their program that specifically states here's kind of your hard threshold number to move forward. But it's a few different options as far as how some districts who have created metrics. I've reached out to a few other colleagues in other districts to see kind of what they have. Some, it's solely just what their county puts out as far as social distancing, masking, and then as there are issues that occur within their school, it's just going to be continuing to work with their public health department. As you can see around, just even around our area, and if you kind of look broader in the state, there's schools that have had to quarantine classrooms or have had to close down a school temporarily. Those things are happening across the state. But these are kind of the options and different metrics that are out there. The question that I know the board has and that we are struggling with is just, we've made a decision at a point in August before there were metrics out. That decision was the K4 and then the enhanced remote as to bring in other students. We have followed everything with regards to the public health order. The public health order does still maintain social distancing, masking, all of those aspects of the order still are intact. It's just the opening and closing metrics. So I know the question, and we have a board meeting on Monday that we're reviewing this, is our initial decision was bringing K4 in. Public health took us down to K2. So now the question is, given where our metrics are, and given kind of with the recommendations from public health, but also looking at things in a broader sense, should we be continuing to move forward with bringing in our 3rd and 4th graders? And then what are thoughts as far as metrics that are the most important for us to be considering, and how do we make those determinations for bringing in not only 3rd and 4th grade, but 5th and 6th and 7th through 12? That's a big question.
Yeah, I know last time we talked about, public health will shut you down before you get to that point. They're not going to do that anymore.
Yeah, I mean, some of their powers are, I think that they still have authority to work with us. And certainly if there was an outbreak in a school, they would be involved with that. and we would probably have some sort of a joint decision. But as far as kind of just a general sense of where we are as a district, and as we start to put forth plans and are communicating to our parents and preparing as a staff to do this, trying to have some level of a guidepost to help us determine when is it prudent for us to do that. And I think that's just the piece that we're really valuing input into. Are there metrics within any of these that resonate with you? What are your thoughts on things that were put out by like public health? And then just trying to see these cases per 100,000 ratios, kind of the trends of spread, and then just really what you know professionally about what's happening in Dane County. What are some of the advice you may give us as we move forward with some recommendations and decisions coming up in the very near future?
I'll go first, is that all right? Is there a noose anywhere?
I got you, don't worry.
Yeah.
You watch my back, I'll watch
Yeah,
yours.
yeah. So mine, I think the process that you're doing, which is the starting of the, as I'm a process type person, I go, the starting small and building your way up makes a lot more sense than anything else. I mean, because we have to have the process for contact tracing. We need to be able to say we have that robustly down, to me, before you add in other groups. Only because the job can be overwhelming and you start to distress staff, besides the risk, right? I mean, of just giving up. Anyway, so personally, I think you're on the right trail of this plan, right? But to me, I would expand it as I got good at that, right? I mean, that would be my thing. Can I do this efficiently and accurately before I raise the grades? And then I might do it, like just like you're saying, one or two at a time, so that I know that I'm there. I also, and then again, this is Bill, speaking as I go, hey, you're probably going to have some sort of thing where staff can volunteer in and volunteer out, because you're going to need teachers to do virtual training anyway. I would be, I mean, again, this is just Bill saying, I would say, hey, I can risk stratify my teaching staff and say, you're my virtual teacher, you know what I mean? And you're my in-house teacher, unless you vehemently oppose. But I see it as like, you guys are in the right thing. It's a stair-stepping process. You are doing it right. I mean, as far as, but you have to prove you can do it, right? And I don't know if anybody can do it, to be honest. You're to me, this is the right thing. It's just that you're so early in it. Why not? We need to wait long enough to find out what happens, right? Because you're doing it. Let's find out in 3 weeks what's happening. And if it's going the way I think it is, that everything's okay, then you just put a stair in, right? And you say, and we'll do that for 3 weeks. And you just keep doing the stairs. Personal opinion, yeah.
I would echo that. I think that being really good, knowing what your capacity for contact tracing is, knowing how many you're having, how quickly can we do it, because all of a sudden, you get an influx of them, you can't handle them, now what do you do? And that's pretty problematic. So I think knowing that you have that process down and you know how many you can have and you can estimate how many more you can do. I'd say the wild card in this, even since the sheet that we had from Dane County came out, is there's a lot of unknown right now. I was talking to Dr. Potoff yesterday about this because he's working right now. But both of our thought was, boy, with what's going on campus, the thing we don't know is what is that going to mean for the rest of the Madison, Waunakee community in the next week, 2 weeks. We hope that it stays confined to campus, but yet we know that those people are out and about and there could be other exposures, which could change substantially the number of people that you might expect. So it feels like the next couple of weeks will tell us, and I might even suggest I like this that you
Me
come up
too.
with.
It's the first time I've seen it.
You could take this as a
Honestly.
baseline, and you could, even though it's not reported that way on the website, you could actually look and see. So we know what so I'll just say, I don't like red, yellow, green in general, and the reason is because there's so many other things that go into it. Is there a cluster of cases? What's going on in Waunakee? Is that happening only on campus? There's all of that. I think you could take this and you could have, in a week, you could run the same assessment, do the calculations back and say, is there increasing evidence of problems in our community? And you have what's going on in your workforce, what's going on with your contact tracing with your students, and what do you see at the population level more broadly? Is that trending in the right direction, the wrong direction? And, as the cases are going up, what is the impact to the school? It's possible you could see the Dane number going up and the school seeing no impact. So you can handle that. And then you can see it going up and being like, gee, as it's gone up, actually, we have seen this, and you could extrapolate out, we think it's gonna require this, do we have the resource to do it? So I actually like I think the metrics that are in here are the right ones. When you think about test positivity rate, I think that's an important one. I think it's important to know what's going on in the community. I think that it's important to know what's going on, so reporting out, what are the trends within the district?
This is the best data I've seen for our district. I published it earlier. And this, to me, if there's a change in this, then we know there's something. That would be more important to us than what's in Dane County.
But I think taking that, I agree, taking the local data, taking the school data, taking the county data, and then doing something like what Elmbrook has here, which is not a red, yellow, green, but this is the story. What's the story of what's going on? More cases, but we're not seeing them. We can contact trace, we feel good about that. Now I feel comfortable maybe going forward, but I would go slow, because if you're gonna double your number of students, presumably you're gonna maybe double your number or close to it, your number of people you gotta contact trace and you're responsible for. So I'd say process, compilation of this, and then, I think otherwise you get into, it says we can be orange, it says we should go, or, and the answer is, well, maybe, I would guess it depends. But I think I just throw out the wild card of what's going to happen from the campus issue right now. That's something that I think the health systems are very concerned about. You probably saw some stuff about visitor restrictions that all the health systems jointly put back into place. And that's partly because one person who comes into your building who's positive can have a substantial impact on your ability to operate. So I think that's kind of a couple of weeks to kind of get processes down, see where things are at, and then sort of reassess. Makes a lot of sense to me.
And I'll reiterate the vulnerable population. I mean, I'm not saying, obviously people will get infected. I think in my world there's different populations of who's getting the infection and getting sick. And I see that's why we're letting the little kids in first, right? I mean, so I sort of watch it as the teachers. I go, there's a difference between a 60-year-old guy like this guy teaching and a young person teaching. So
we have seen some heat maps that I saw last week that with some of our analytics people going through and doing some assessments. And so the heat map really is on the isthmus, but if you look at it a little bit broader outside, there are a couple, and I don't know which districts they are, but who are outside of Dane County who are having in-person school, and there were some heat map bullets on there. You guys may already know, which ones those are. It's just another thing to think about. As other people are going back and seeing things, what can we learn from there as well?
That would be my question too, for the metrics that are the examples that we have here. When did they start school, and kind of what are they seeing with utilizing the metrics that they've chosen to go back to school?
I think most of these probably started September 1st right away.
So yeah, it'll take time to have, but I think if we're looking toward other districts to see if we like their metrics, we should also follow their data closely to see what their outcomes are.
There's not much out there from other districts. I mean, that's the one thing we're finding, and that's the big question, I think, amongst my colleagues, is kind of what are you using? Some of it's whatever their county health department is doing and having a collaboration with them, and then some because of kind of a lack of guidance, or they've created or found something that they've adopted on their own.
But I think one of the things to note is the number that came up, you're tracking 19 cases or either close or tested positive. There's 600, approximately 600 staff. That's 3.6%. If you look at total population, they're 3.2. So we're tracking total population. Within our community here, school community.
And our 19 was
Student census.
that was student census.
So I think we're actually tracking below which does it.
But I think that's an important number to track over time as well. You're going to want to know that, right? You're going to want to know how many new students and staff, this week versus last week, because you'll kind of want to know, okay, the second week or, something's going on. I think that's going to be a
That's why
relevant
the
number.
3 weeks, to me, I apologize, is 3 or 4 weeks so you know what happens, right? Are we responsible for a rise, or are we not responsible for a rise? I mean, so,
I mean, the one thing we've talked about is that number in 19 can double with one kid
right.
in one moment.
Which gets back to the process piece, you've got to be able to.
I think
handle that.
process-
Exactly right.
So I apologize, you're in a hot seat.
But I think that's the first rate limiting step is I would want to, before I would add any other kids in, I would want to feel really good that I knew exactly what to do. And, you know, I made that as efficient as possible. Or we have a way to allocate FTE, you know, to do the work.
Do we have somebody that we could allocate to the COVID center?
Say that one more time.
To Bill's point, you know, and to the hospital points, you've got that dedicated staff member that is following and tracking. Do we have that person, you know, in our staff? You know, is there somebody in our staff that we
Not specifically to that, because the other counterparts to Sarah are doing the same work you're doing. You're working in multiple capacities. I would say Kurt's filling some of that role, and I would say from when we look at a lot of these decisions, we're at a point where nobody's making the decision all by themselves. It's very much of a team collaborative effort, either administratively or with the nurses.
But to your point, having a COVID data center, if you will, it's a person not making decisions but collecting data, making calls, making those follow-up. And you can put together a script for that person to ask the right questions so that it can be disseminated through whoever needs to have that data.
Or the email going to the script. I mean, to me, that's email going to script. Yeah, so that email going to phone call or whatever, however you build it.
The other thing I think is important, you know, for you to, I'm looking out for you here, is as you bring more kids back, you bring more non-COVID related, you know, care needs, you know, that people have. And if you're devoting all of your time to dealing with the increased COVID need, how are you responding to the other parts? So that's just over.
Yeah, to his point, I think you'll have to have some sort of specialized zone where you say this is the person. This is at least the point person on this all the time. Not that you guys aren't all point people doing it, but I think that's going to have to happen in some way.
In order for us to have a person, we would need to we would have to identify who that person is and then reassign the other parts of their job to do that. And that may or may not be possible because everybody else has a full.
But what kind of skill level do you need to collect that data? It's basically putting somebody in a call center and
It's training. I mean, when you
So
look at,
how long is it going to take to do that training? Is it a week? Is it an hour? Is it a month? You know, to train somebody to collect that data, and then you just put you put a temporary person, because this COVID's not going to last. Theoretically, it's not going to be around forever.
yeah.
But it all ends up somewhere. It all ends up downstream at some point, right? So you have to, it may make it easier, but you still have to make sure you're not overwhelming, because ultimately a lot of this requires a clinician, you know, or somebody who has clinical knowledge to be able to make that assessment. So at some point, all roads lead back to you, right?
That doesn't mean that she can't be, that's not just putting you in this job. You're like, what'd you do? Right, I go, hey, you need some sort of point person on it, probably, whether it's at the board level or at the, probably at all places, right? At the board level, at you're doing it, and then at the clinical level,
Yeah.
there has to be somebody.
But if you look at it from a process standpoint, you got to collect data.
Mm-hmm.
Data is probably the most time-consuming.
Right. Oh, I agree.
So
Yeah.
what we need, it seems, is a person that can be dedicated to collecting data as we bring more kids
And
into
I'll
the
make the case you'll end up with more person than one. I mean, over time.
What's that?
You may end up with more
For
person.
redundancy, yeah, that person.
Yeah,
is-
and my question is what type of skill set does that person need to collect that data? You know,
So that's what contact tracers do for the county. And so I think if we were to, I think that if we were to create that position, it would be a contact tracing
That's what I
position.
thought, yeah.
And we should provide the same kind of training for that person that we would provide for the contact tracers for the county get. And how do you gather information in a respectful manner from families? what are the guidelines, how long do they need to be quarantined, all of that, we would provide that level of education for that contact tracer. And then ultimately, if they had clinical type questions, they would need to be referred back to us.
Yeah, it sounds like that's something we need, so maybe on Monday night we bring that up.
Well, I think it's,
To get going.
To Bill and Matt's point, if we have a centralized COVID, triage or, war room, if you will, and in that war room, you're collecting data, which is the county contact tracers, then, you can put that data together, disseminate it to who needs to know to make decisions.
As I was just saying to Randy, it doesn't have to be somebody who works in the school. It can be a home, somebody at home, accessing and making calls.
But I do think the process, you have it right now. I mean, you have the right, to me, the right process, and I don't know how you feel about it. You have the right process, it's just the efficiency of doing it. We've all been through it, because we went through, how long was the line you stood in the first day? I mean, it was amazing. I mean, our lines would go around the buildings to try to get into the building, right? It all became skinnier as time went because we knew what was the efficiencies. You're on the base floor right now. And it all became even more efficient as people got dedicated to that particular part of the job, right? So.
And the cost, like for an error, the reason that it takes so long right now is because the cost of making an error in this process is huge. If a child who's symptomatic and ends up testing positive for COVID was in school for 3 days, the impact of that is huge. And so I think that that's what I would like to stress along with you both, saying it needs to be an incremental increase in the numbers.
But to your point, you started the discussion that you're getting the information, you're starting to collect it, you go off and do your training, you go off over here, and now you've got to pick that up again. There is a chance for making errors.
Absolutely.
So again, if you sit down and put one or two, and maybe it's just one right now, contact tracers, that's their dedicated function, takes that off your plate so you can, do what you do best, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's using your skills. So we're just talking about practicing top licensure, right? Which is find people who can get the data entry components and do those and leave you to deal with things you need to deal with. But I think we're talking about two things here, right? We're talking about one, operational preparedness. And we're talking about sort of clinical, what the disease is doing. And those two intersect in a lot of ways. But one is, again, what is the impact clinically that we're seeing, and can we handle that operationally? So, I mean, I think the contact tracing, setting up the data metrics points are all things that, need to be there for the operational so you can understand what the clinical is. I think so, because at this point, what I think we're saying is operationally there's still those things that need to be fixed, and we should get those, situated. Not that anything's bad, but like you said, we've been doing this for 6 months now. There's still things that we're figuring out.
Every day we change, every freak.
And then I think the other risk right now is just understanding what's going to happen in the community. If we were back where we were, 2 weeks ago, and we're sitting at 35, 40 cases a day, and it's just steady Eddie, I think that's a lot different than where we are now. There's just a lot of uncertainty for the clinical aspect of what's going to happen.
So it sounds like you're saying there are two processes, we have the clinical side of it, the health side of it, and we've got the data collection, processing side of it. And you've asked about that processing side. We have 1.5 FTEs of nursing for our district. Is if we streamlined and hired somebody for the processing side, do we still have enough coverage for our clinical side? So when all of those kids are coming in and that clinical decision has to be made between go home, stay at school, COVID, non-COVID, follow it, whatever that process is that needs that clinician's expertise, is our 1.5 FTEs enough?
That's a very good question. And, you know, our health staff that we have at the schools is wonderful. And their skills are great, but they're not licensed health professionals. And so with the few students that we've had visiting the health office with symptoms, we've been fortunate the past couple weeks that they've been students that we were able to identify. You know, maybe it was a student who had a headache, but you know, it was a student that was well known to us, and they were able to rest for 5 minutes and go back to class. But the health office assistant is not comfortable making that decision for sure on their own. There needs to be some collaboration there. If it's cut and dry and we know that we're sending them home, I think that's easier. But in those cases where it's unclear, they definitely need to collaborate. Right now with Jenny and I, and the number of students that we have, yes, but as we increase the numbers, there may be a need to look at that as well. And I know that the board has considered, increasing nursing support at certain times. And if you are able to do that, and that has been something that you've talked about in past years without COVID, now would be the time to consider doing that.
Yeah, it sounds like it's a need, and it sounds like we need to have it in place to move forward with other grades. So that's why I was saying we meet Monday night. If we can get some job responsibilities or some what knowledge they would need, bring it to the full board on Monday. Because again, we don't want, our biggest pushback from the public is we're not making decisions fast enough. And I don't think we need to be put in a position like this that we're going to need to go to 3rd and 4th, 5th and 6th, without overloading the capacity of our staff. We need to start bringing this stuff to us that makes sense at the next board meeting.
Well, I think when you look at the public, the public just wants a plan. Right now, everything is kind of vague. We get this county order, we get this. And I think what the public needs to, so that we can, reassure them that we are bringing kids back, is what are those metrics? And this seems to be a good one, the census tract, and creating that picture so that if these things happen in 2 weeks, we're bringing them back.
With your data from your staff. I mean,
Right, right.
the sense, you have to use, to everybody's point, you have to use it all. I mean, the story has to be.
That's correct. You create and maybe it's this, ad hoc committee coming together every 2 weeks or something and taking a look at that data and saying, does it make sense? Now is potentially a good time to do that.
I don't know how possible or plausible this is, but as you're talking, I think it really is about scenario modeling, to some degree. It really is about at this many, call-ins, or this many symptoms, this is what it takes. At this many, this is what it takes. And you're kind of getting to know what your push points are on a couple of the key metrics, probably from staff or students, and probably from the number of calls just in general. It feels like that would be super helpful, because that then goes into the future as well. You can say, gee, if we bring this many students back, we think it's about likely that we'll increase by this many. Can we handle that, yes or no? And then as you start to see the numbers go up with respiratory season, that's going to be another component. So I feel like if there was scenario modeling done up front, it would behoove you, like throughout the rest of the school year, actually to figure out what we think we can handle or not. And it might also help the board understanding, gee, is 1 the right number? how many contact tracers do we need? Is it one? Is it one nurse? You know, what is, and so you kind of figure out in each scenario, what is the rate limiting step?
Right.
That's a fair amount of work, right? So, but I think that that's probably the ideal way in my mind. We're doing the same things, right? So we're modeling, you know, what if we have X number of staff out? You know, when does it cause us to have to take an action? Those types of things. So I feel like at some level, like low, middle, high, you know, pick numbers and say, you know, what do we think it would take?
I think the challenge to that, though, is, you know, you're essential healthcare workers, and your hospital has to stay open no matter what. And what gets lost a little bit when we move away from a red, yellow, green, and just have metrics, is sort of that, okay, we can handle this from a staffing perspective, but from disease burden and the spread and how are we contributing to the burden of the county? I feel like if we don't have an idea in mind of how much is too much, and if we're not following Dane County on that, then if we're sitting at the table, what's our, you know,
So to me,
what's our
that's-
gut?
I think this is accurate. I mean, this is your idea of comparing week over week, because we will, I don't know how far back we can go, I mean, to see the numbers.
Yeah, we're gonna see if we can go back.
Because then we would know,
And get
right?
some
I mean,
data.
if you know, because this is why the K2 thing, I think, is like, this is to find out, right? I mean, it may be we caused the disease burden, then it'll be clear we can't move on, right?
Yeah.
I mean, then we have that no, we have the negative, so there's always I see there's a positive statement and a negative statement, right? If we can find evidence that we're not increasing the disease burden, then hey, maybe we should try the next. If we find evidence that we are increasing the disease burden, then the public should know that we are, right? I mean, that, and then at least, it looks like we could get evidence here. Like we could find out what the current rate is, and if we come into school and everything, in 3 weeks from now, we can see the disease burden is higher, we might be the problem.
To make it a more specific level too, you though would know based on your own students and your own staff, what is that burden, you know, because if the school district is contributing, and if the school is contributing to community spread, it's going to be because you have more people who are out infecting other people. So to me, it could be a lag in that, but if all of a sudden, you
Well, that's what I
you
mean by
bring
the-
third and fourth grade back, and all of a sudden you go from, you know, 2 kids last week to 15 kids this week, it's going to be a red flag. It's like, hey, maybe we are contributing, and maybe this is the wrong thing, and we need to pull.
Well, I don't mean to use just this, but
Oh,
I'm
yeah,
saying
but I
that
think it's the
you
internal
have-
plus that.
This is, to me, this is your community thing. I mean, this is, are we contributing to the bad in the community? And the other is is your tracking thing. And you need to use them both. And to the point of the board, I think you say, hey, if we find evidence that one of these is worse than the other, then we have to stay or go down, right? I mean, there's a positive view, hey, the rate didn't go up, maybe we can add grades. And the negative view, the rate went up, maybe we can't, right? Or we have to. And that's how I would do it, but again, it's hard.
I have a few questions, sorry. One is that I've heard that the community wants, I've heard, I'm sorry, I can't see your guy in the black mask. Good job.
The guy in the black.
I heard Jack say that the community is looking for a plan, and I'm also hearing and understanding totally that it all depends. You know, that's always the joke in PT school. The answer to every question is it depends. So if we're looking at the community data and we're looking at whether it changes to know whether or not we've contributed to that change, if we were to, you know, how long do we wait with sorry, let me back up. 4K, because we actually go down to 4K, 4K2 in the district, how long do we wait before this data might change to tell us we were the ones who did it? Because that gives us an idea of, okay, community, we're not going to have long-term answers. We're just not, because this is just the way of the world right now. But we've got these kids in, we need to wait this many, then we're going to reassess the data, and if it looks good, you know, 2 weeks after we reassess it, then we know we can bring X number more in, and this is our wait period again as we wait for the disease to come into the community. Do you know what I'm asking? Okay.
Yeah, so it's the generation
And I
time.
know it
whether you're
depends, but-
Exponential, so.
I mean, you're thinking it's probably at least 2 to 3 weeks.
I would use 4 just to
Yeah.
be careful. I mean, that's what I would use is 4, which is a long time in the community sense, I'm sure.
And I think that I think we've heard this from patients, in our health systems. You've heard it from the public here in the school district. Everybody wants a really concrete plan. The risk you run by putting out a concrete plan is you say, oops, we didn't get that one right, and, we changed. And so there's sort of the yin yang of we want to give you certainty because everybody's craving certainty right now, and yet it's an incredibly fluid, uncertain time. So I think in my experience, at least over these last 6 months, having guiding principles, without committing to arbitrary cutoffs is more advantageous because it gives you the wiggle room to do the right thing and not feel like you're violating some other number. So I think that, committing to something that says we need to get our contact tracing and nursing staffing plan down, and feel really good about that before we're able to bring more kids in. And we need to understand what the impact of that is having on our internal, staff and students and making sure that that's stable. And we need to make sure that in conjunction with that, the community is stable, that we don't see any evidence that we're contributing to risk to other community members.
That's the 3 things.
If you get those 3 things and you say, we can do the nursing and the contact tracing, we're stable as far as our internal numbers are decreasing, and we're stable here, then there's not really that much of an argument that you're contributing, and you could say, we feel pretty good, we can go to the next step.
Yep, I agree with that.
And my other question was, and I think you kind of covered it, but I just want to make sure I'm understanding, and that is, the local data is really interesting to look at, because if our 19 are in this, that's 7.5% of the cases are within the school system, which I just thought was interesting. But I think I heard you say we still need to look at Dane County as well, because I, for one, don't live in Waunakee, and the grocery stores that I go to, the college students may have also walked down that aisle in front of me, and not necessarily in Waunakee, and so there's this big, lots of people in Waunakee shop outside of Waunakee. We are a very mobile and fluid society, so we're still needing to take into account those numbers within the county as well, correct?
Yeah, I
They're
think
not
there's
the ones that we
dependencies.
use to see how we give to the burden. That's more of these, but we still need to keep them in.
I think there's dependencies. That the county number is, like this past week, the county number went like this, right? And so that'd be kind of one of those where you might be like, okay, what's going to happen? Maybe hold on. If that county number goes up, let's say that the UW continues to have issues and it stays at like 200, which is way above where it was, but, is not going up anymore. And that becomes more stable, and we don't see any impact in this or in our internal school numbers, then we can say, at this point, we don't feel like what's happening on campus is impacting Waunakee. I don't know that we can say that right now. We don't
It's
know.
too early for
But in
us
a
to
week
know.
or two, we probably can have
Yeah,
a
we
decent
won't know.
idea, as long as they're not, shooting up in their 400 or 500. So I think where you have stability for a period of a couple of weeks, and then you have stability and then separate metrics, and you think about the metrics, you're thinking about, again, the internal, the Waunakee, the Dane County level, where you can have some stability or lack of rapid increase, and you have stability in your own internal data then as well, then I think you can feel pretty good about that. That's a lot of ifs, though, sorry.
That's like one of those giant Venn diagrams.
I think people can live with, let's say we want to wait 2 or 3 weeks to check the data, and then if the data looks good, so our numbers aren't going up internal in the building, we've got our nursing plan down, we've got our contact tracing down, things like that. So if we put all of these steps in place, they look good, then maybe we look at the semester. Things fall apart, the wheels fall off the bus at the semester, then you go back to the community, hey, we've done our best, but this is a spread, and we're not going to pull the plug and open up. But I think there has to be, something, that, this is what we're doing, and I think you guys have laid it out. You put the 3 points in there, And if those 3 points look good, then maybe it makes sense to bring, the 4th graders back. And then, then we wait a couple weeks or 3 weeks, whatever we decide, to see, do we have enough contact tracers? Do we have enough, nursing staff or operational or clinical staff? We do. Then we bring in the next group, and then we wait another couple of weeks, 3 weeks, and say, okay, is everything jiving? Our numbers seem to be stable in our population. Madison could spike tomorrow again, and those people may be confined to campus. It doesn't look like the staff, the professors, it doesn't appear that their numbers are going up. It seems like their numbers have stabilized, with a handful of cases. Yes, those students might come back to Waunakee, and that would be a problem, right? But the staff that lives in Waunakee doesn't seem like they're contributing to, the COVID outbreak or increase in cases. So I think if we could come up with kind of a plan like that, now what you're doing is saying, okay, we're incrementally increasing the number of students that we're bringing back and the grades that we're bringing back in the building. And then if everything works out good, then by, January or February, we've got everybody back in the building, right?
Best case scenario, right?
And I don't want to be Debbie Downer, but you also have to build the negative by means you have to build the negative and the positive kind of into your plan. Right? If things go worse, you have to have a way to come out.
To back out of it, yeah.
Right.
The other thing that I'm just wondering about, because I think that those are good 3 metrics, but Dane County does also track, the ability of, I just don't want to lose their metrics that may influence us as well, like the percent of hospitals. Right now, we're in good shape for how hospitals can deal with illness, but, even if we're not seeing a gigantic rise in cases here in Waunakee, if hospitals are overloaded in Madison, that's where our people will need to go for emergency care. So if we create a sheet like this, I don't want us to lose track of that as a number, and that's one of the things that, the value of keeping, even if we choose to go with our own metrics, really sticking close with Dane County data as well will be important. And like I said, now it's green, so we're not even thinking about it as something that we need to throw out, but it needs to be on the radar.
I had a parent ask me that question. Sarah, I had a parent email me that question today, just about hospitalizations. And so at this point, we're in a good space with hospitals.
It's been steady. I think the number is between 25 and 35 or so
Our
hospitalized.
use ICU beds, I think we have available ICU beds.
I think it's going to be. It'll be telling, but I agree. I think leaving the
The
design there
testing.
is important.
Availability of testing,
Yeah.
those are I just don't want us
Those
to
are
come out
important
with
things, I agree.
these concrete, very locally specific data and forget about testing and hospital capacity.
Yeah, that's great.
Right, you have a question?
I don't have a question, I just
Statement.
have something that, I absolutely heard from multiple spots on the table the importance of having the process established and the staffing to manage the process. The one subset of that I don't want anyone to lose sight of, and we need to remember if we put out there we're going to do things by a certain date, is that we have to make sure that we are staffed to do so.
Right.
And that, things such as school nurses, well, we have 2 great ones.
We have 1.5.
1.5, 2 individuals. They're challenging to find.
She's the half, by the
Right?
way.
They're challenging to find. And so we cannot have or create timelines that don't permit us to go out and get the staff that we need and have time to hire them, because there is not a single individual in our school district that is not working to full capacity right now. And so to do more things and to get more people, we need to go get them from outside of our district. And so that's got to be a part and a realization of any plan is that it's going to need to have time to hire people.
And that's not easy right now, right? Because we're going to arm wrestle you for nurses.
But I think, you know, when you look at business growth and employment growth in business, it's never a straight line. It's always a step process. You know, you forecast what you need in the next 6 months to a year. You build up that, and then your workload goes up to where you have to do the next step. You know, if these cases go up, you know, it's not going to be bringing in a quarter person or a half person. It's, you know, we got to do a full person now, and maybe what that person is, it's part of a COVID team that we're putting together, and COVID goes away, and you can reassess whether you really need them in your existing operation.
And UW is hiring contact tracers, and it's a contract, you know, it's a short-term contract if you wanted to do. I mean, there may be people out there who would be willing to sign up for a 6-month contract or something.
Yeah, I think
But your
that's
contract tracers are going to be easier than your clinical staff.
Yeah,
To
probably,
make,
right?
making Brian's job even harder, I think it's gonna have to be some clinical, and we talked, I mean,
Yeah.
it's like, making those decisions is at the point, like, if the nurse calls you and says, you have to come look at this kid, I mean, that's not easy, you have to be ready to make those decisions and comfortable with it, so. But it's-
Brian and I have had a number of conversations that we do need to, you know, we do have challenge hiring right now, as many people do, but we also need to put out that plea to our community to be looking for folks and to help us recruit people to come into these positions. So that's kind of our, as we're starting to identify things like contact tracers, et cetera, that'll be a piece that we're going to need. And saying this for the benefit of those watching as well, that we're going to need some assistance with finding folks to step up to help us in that realm.
And I wonder too if there are any nurses in the community that have children in the school district that could, you know, plea out to those folks who might be able to have capacity to help.
Lauren and Sarah, I haven't heard much from you. What are your thoughts on some of the things that we're talking about here?
I completely agree with Bill and Matt that you really have to look at what's happening internally in your schools. I also am very mindful of what's happening in the community with hospitalizations, and I watch at least the UW statistics every day because I have ready access to them. And so, you know, given that information and, you know, what I'm hearing from you all happening in the school, I think it makes complete sense to have sort of a staggered approach and, you know, your plan to do everything with 4K through 2 really well, get that system down, and then bring in these other groups to follow. And it seems like, you know, with the dates that you have listed for, you know, your plans to tentatively bring back these other age groups, you've sort of, whether intentionally or unintentionally, built in this really nice system of allowing several weeks to review that data and see, you know, do we have the staff capacity? What's happening with the children in our classrooms? And I think it does have to be a bit fluid, and it's hard to be hard and fast about it.
Yeah, Sarah, I was going to ask you, in your conversations with these families, how many questions are they asking you that would require clinical judgment over the phone?
Usually, I mean, it's mostly information gathering.
Okay.
And like, I think that a contact tracer could do the phone call piece of it.
Sure.
And then, you know, the clinical judgment comes in, let's say if a parent says, my child has allergies or asthma, and, you know, and this symptom, because all of these symptoms are increased from your baseline, right? So if there's a child who has a chronic cough due to allergies or asthma, I don't think we can depend on a non-licensed professional to make that judgment call about whether this is their regular cough or not, and needing to gather that information. Or otherwise, you just have to have everybody with those symptoms go get a COVID test or So there will be cases where we have kids who are able to attend, but the necessary, information gathering or assessment needs to happen if that child, looking into their record and seeing, do we have them listed as having allergies and asthma? And then being able to say to the parent, oh, I see here that they're on Flonase. Have they been using that regularly? Those types of things are more clinical. Like, how can we get your symptoms under control so that your child can be in school if this is their baseline, right?
Can I do my best to try to summarize kind of what we've talked about for the last 45 minutes here? So what I have taken down as some notes, and this is extremely helpful, is that the thoughts from the group are that we should take some time to assess what our data is over the next few weeks. So if you, and I know Bill, we talked 2 weeks, we talked 4 weeks, kind of, I guess that'd be a piece I'd just like to clarify, is this, the data we pulled today that Kurt was able to, that we learned about through kind of our public health call, through DHS, we pulled that today. How long of a period of time do we need to kind of develop some of that data before we can then kind of assess it and move forward and feel relatively comfortable with where we're at? It seems like to just do it in a week seems relatively short because that can be a pretty volatile piece, but are we talking 2 weeks? Or I guess that was a piece I wanted to kind of come back to.
Again, I don't know much about that. I'm sort of the 4-week person just because then I know that it gives Brian a chance to get everything together too. I'm not saying we're going to get that person, but I want it to be, when it happens, I'd rather never go backwards. You know what I mean? And I think that's my personal, I don't know.
I think if you're already a weekend, if you consider that, I think you're talking at least 2 to 3 more.
Okay.
So I think if you did it like the end of the month, like you think about the first week or of October-ish, somewhere around there,
Okay.
and you do the assessment, I would feel pretty good that you're going to know at that point.
Yeah.
The only variable will be the community number, but I think if you looked at that and it looked pretty good, I think then you could probably have a reasonable confidence in making a decision.
Okay. Well, so just to kind of go back to that, we would look at establishing some of that data that Kurt, we've been talking about, looking at that at a point in time of the last week in September, first week in October. The other guiding principles, and I like that concept that you tossed out there, was one, making sure that we had our processes down for content tracing and our nursing process. That was the first one. The second one was the impact of what's happening with our students and staff on an internal basis. And then also looking at this from a community perspective, which is some of the data pieces that Kurt was able to provide. And then Sarah, you had offered that we should also be watching the hospitalization data. Are those
And
kind of
testing capacity.
and the testing capacity. And then,
I guess one of the things that I would add is how long is it going to take us to make sure that our process is under control? If we don't put a date on it, coming out of business, you've got a date and everybody kind of works towards that date. So is it 2 weeks that we feel comfortable that we're going to have our process down? Is it 3 weeks? Is it a month? Is it 6 months? Because I think if we don't put some milestones in there, hard milestones, it just turns into more.
Yeah, so mine is that it's going to be, I don't know whether, because at the board level, you guys have to decide, are you going to get a contact tracer? And is that somebody you already have in your building? Is that person exist? So that's to me, the limit would become a limiting factor.
Right.
To your
I'm not
point,
asking
how
you
long
guys,
do they
I'm
train
just
them?
asking you as a
Yeah.
question. So-
yeah, well, no, I'm not trying to be harsh about it. I'm just saying, I think you could get it done, but you have to find that person, and I don't know who mentioned the community, but there's almost certainly somebody in the community that there's a retired nurse or a nurse with kids that could do this, or somebody who's done that type of work. The insurance people, there's all sorts of people. It's just, how do you get that person and get them up to date?
I think it goes back to part of what you're saying, Jack, is what Matt was talking about. was you gotta kind of run a scenario and say, if our next step is grades 3 and 4 in, do we have capacity to bring in 3 and 4 given what we have? I think that was kind of what you were saying.
Yep.
Absolutely.
How
And
many
I would say
equivalents
right
it
now,
takes.
that answer is no.
Right. Which,
And
yeah, Jack kind of knows it. I mean,
Yeah, so I think that was kind of at least what I, and then as you were looking at subsequent groups after that, kind of what's our capacity to be able to handle that, given we walked into the school year not knowing what we were going to expect here. And so now we're a week in, we have a picture of it. So now we need to start kind of putting out that projection of if we bring in 3rd and 4th grade, particularly as we progress through the year, what does that mean and what do we need to have in place?
yeah, how much FTE?
And that was kind of what you were talking
Yeah,
about.
yeah, some sort of a system engineer, you
Yep.
need an
How
engineering
many
type of,
FTEs it's gonna take to get
model
that
it or
done?
something.
Yeah.
My concern about having well, I understand the need for a date to aim toward. My concern is that we had a date for the start of school and that changed over the summer. And then it even changed the Friday before school was sort of supposed to start. And so those numbers are very flexible. And my concern is that people are going to get really frustrated if we have a hard date and then everything that gets in the way of that date, even though it may be realistic and all of us know that's just the nature of it. The only thing that stays the same is change according to Melissa Etheridge, and I think that's really true.
What I hear
So-
from you, Jack, is basically you're looking at how long is it going to take us to assess what we need? And then get out there in front of us.
It's internal. It's a project management plan.
Right.
You know, it's,
Okay.
we need contract, we determined that we needed a contract tracer. When do we start? When do we have that person on board? What training does that person need? It's not going out to the community saying, you know, this is what we're doing. But if we don't have those dates and a plan so that we can execute, we're going to be here in January still talking about it.
I think to your point, maybe it's not so much the outcome of we're going to be ready to go by blank. Maybe it's we'll have the contact tracing position understood and, you know, detailed and posted by, you know, blank date. We'll have the nursing position posted by blank date. We'll have the scenarios, you know, allocated because maybe you can do 3. I guess, you know, maybe not, but maybe things would get better and you could do 3 and 4, you know, prior. But to me, it's sort of because you can't really control. I mean, you can be aggressive as you can in the hiring process, but you know, you need to understand how long is that from the time of hire to the time where a contact tracer would be ready to go, kind of a thing. Maybe somebody wants to volunteer tonight, you know.
We'll send my email.
Yeah.
Hey, Jack, I think we have to have some pile, we're meeting as a board on Monday.
Right.
And I think part of what needs to probably come there is we need to summarize some of the discussion we're having here. We need to start outlining, what does that mean? And I'm sure that we can find out what it takes to be a contact tracer. We can pull some of
Yeah,
those pieces together.
I've got 4 questions that I'm going to contact public health about.
Yep.
Their contact tracing division to gather information.
And I think we can then start to map that out.
Yep.
So we can at least show kind of that progression here for the board. That would be what that's what I would hope for coming out of here. So then the board can see that and make some decisions, and then we're going to have to set kind of what our time is to reevaluate when we're going to come back and were we able to meet those things based on some of the variables, some within our control, some without.
And I think that we've pretty much established that contact tracer is necessary. So to be able to vote on that or whatever needs to happen to get that and post it sooner rather than later is a good thing.
I don't see, once we kind of have an idea of what it is, there's no
Yeah.
problem with us getting it posted even before Monday.
Yeah.
And to me, that's a piece that we're going to talk about just because we posted. For any reason, I don't see that happening, the board not supporting that, it's just a posting.
No, it's a necessary piece.
It's a necessary piece that we're going to have to get moving with. And
Yeah.
when we assess
All I'm
it.
saying is putting dates on milestones. And if we put those dates on the milestones, then the likelihood of us meeting them is greater than if we don't have them.
Understand. So I think, yeah, the internal processes, I agree. The returning kids to school, I don't agree. Because that's gotta-
We're talking about internal process.
Right, that's what I'm saying.
Yep.
Yep. Did I hit all of the main points that we talked about? All right, anybody? Okay, good. All right. The next items, and a part of this we've already talked about, is with relates to some of the scenarios, Kurt. And you had already walked through.
Yeah, we kind of already talked about that.
We did that with the one document that we had with
For those of you that can remember all the way back to Saturday morning, when I sent an email with actually this document attached to it. Well, it was actually, I think it was these two documents, the action plan and then the when a student or faculty staff member can return to school. What Rebecca had shared with you on Thursday, I believe it was our old scenarios that were like multiple 7 or 8 pages long that were really, what we are using now, Sarah and I, as we're doing this work, we're really using this document. It covers all of those other ones that were in that other 7-page document that Rebecca had emailed to all of you. This one we just find it's more friendly. I'm actually grateful because that multiple page one was one I put together combining 2 sources. Public Health put this one together and I'm grateful for them to do that. So we're going to switch to this one as we do the work that we're doing. That's more of an FYI to all of you as we're moving away from that larger document to this document because I think we talked at the last one, everybody wanted to see that one that I put together, and I did, but then we have this now, so that's that item.
Any questions about that aspect for Kurt? Okay. The last item we had was, there was a question at our last meeting about pop-up testing, and I did pose that question to Public Health, and others within the school community had also posed that. And their answer is that they are not just, they will not at our request kind of develop a pop-up testing piece because of the draws that they're having in other areas. But if we became a significant outbreak, then they would. They said there was also ways that you could contract with like Exact Sciences, but they said then you're going to be in competition with everybody else who's trying to get those tests. So their advice was that you work with them to the degree possible and we develop our internal processes, but there's not going to be a pop-up piece that they're going to be able to support us with.
And good news that we also learned on our public health phone call today is that the Alliant Energy Center has been extended to the end of the calendar year. They did indicate that they may have to do some shifting because they don't believe they're going to have the level of support from the National Guard that they have currently, but they will at least be able to keep that center going through the end of the calendar year. So that's good news for us.
Agreed.
That's good.
All right. Yeah, let's look at future meetings. We're looking at 3 weeks out. Does that make sense? That'd be October 7th. On a Wednesday again. 5:30 or 6 work better. Does it matter for you? Probably you guys.
Then I'll say, I don't know, I'm here, I'd be a little late at 5:30, but 5:30, a little late to.
I'm in our incident command structure that week, so I'll be here if I can, and hopefully will be.
Let's hope you are.
Jeff maybe will be back at that time too. I don't know what his schedule is, but one of us will do our best to make it.
All right.
Okay. Lauren,
That's
Sarah,
fine.
Val?
That's fine.
5:30? Okay, 5:30 on October 7th. All right, can I get a motion to adjourn?
I'm motion to adjourn.
Can I get a second? Second. All right, all in favor, say aye. Aye. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all, appreciate it.